historians and I have been making some interesting discoveries in our archaeological research. Our most recent findings concern the history of the town of... Scituate, Massachusetts. Scituate's a coastal town in eastern Mass, and its name is derived from an Indian word which means cold brook and referred to the small stream flowing into the harbor. Europeans hailing from Plymouth in Kent County, England, settled in this town in 1628. This was the first permanent settlement in this territory and contained one public street consisting of stores and homes. The only known conflict in the town was a border disagreement between the Europeans and the natives who had been there for years prior. It may sound like an ordinary colonial town, but our findings may suggest otherwise. We found a very interesting book written by James D. Drake about the history of King Philip's War. According to Drake, the interdependence that developed between English and Indians in the years leading up to the war helps explain its notorious brutality. Believing they were dealing with an internal rebellion and therefore with an act of treason, the colonists and their native allies often meted out harsh punishments. The end result was nothing less than the decimation of New England's indigenous population and the consequent social, political, and cultural reorganization of the region.
In short, by waging war among themselves, the English and Indians of New England destroyed the world they had constructed together. In its place, a new society emerged, one in which native people were marginalized and the culture of New England receded into the past.
King Philip's War proved a critical turning point in the history of New England, leaving English colonists decisively in command of the region at the expense of native peoples. Although traditionally understood as an inevitable clash of cultures, or as a classic example of conflict on the frontier between Indians and whites, in the view of James D. Drake, it was neither. Instead, he argues, King Philip's War was a civil war, whose divisions cut across ethnic lines and tore apart a society composed of English colonizers and Native Americans alike.
We started digging to research King Philip's War in greater detail. King Philip's War, also known as Metacom's War, or the First Indian War, whatever floats your canoe, was an armed conflict between English colonists and the American Indians of New England in the 17th century. It is said to be the Native Americans' last major effort to drive the English colonists out of New England. The war took place between 1675 and 1676 in Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Massachusetts, and later spread to Maine and New Hampshire. The war is named for King Philip, also known by his Wampanoag name, Metacom. He was the son of the late Wampanoag chief, Massasoit. In conducting this research, we came across some new findings that would rock the historical world. An old building. A ripped document. What do these two things have in common? Well, I'm glad you asked. These 40 acres were home to one of the biggest refugee camps during King Philip's War.
The reason we were able to find documents such as this one is because this was their secretive center of operations.
King Philip's War was one of the most bloodiest wars during the century. Without this camp, the Native Americans would have either been killed or enslaved.
In an abandoned farmhouse, the archaeological team found a very interesting document. It was contained in an inlaid box made in Gujarat, India, for export to Portugal, circa 1600. Teak, ebony, and other precious hardwoods with ivory details. The box was important, maybe even for a future AP World History exam, but what was inside was even more consequential. The box contained journal entries, shipping documents, and minutes for a meeting. As our research team read into the documents, they discovered that a secret society was based in Scituate. It consisted of 6 men: Timothy Hatherley, Giles Saxton, John Lathrope, Charles Chauncey, Edmund D. Sewall, and Nicholas Baker. They formed a corporation that bought 40 acres of land around 1654. According to the minutes of the meeting and various journal entries, this society's land served as a refugee center for Native Americans hiding from King Philip's War. The various causes of the creation of this refugee camp included the racism that Europeans felt toward Native Americans, as well as the indignant feeling of Native Americans at getting their land stolen. The last and final cause is the ruthlessness in which Europeans pursued and killed the Native Americans.
Based on the minutes we found in this very building, this is a brief reenactment of the very last meeting that took place here. Listen up, everyone. The soldiers are closing in on our borders. We need a plan, fast.
We're gonna die. They're all moving in.
How are we possibly going to evacuate 200 refugees?
Isn't there a river down there? We can go downstream.
But wait, we need to burn our tracks.
So the soldiers can't figure out it's us?
Exactly.
But I don't want to be forgotten. What can we do? We could hide documents of our
Shipping
minutes,
documents.
shipping documents.
In
We
inlaid
could have
box.
the minutes of our meeting in a box, hidden so well that only archaeologists of the future can find it. All right, everyone. We have to work fast in order to survive. Let's go.
Let's do it. This event was very similar to the events of the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad demonstrated that not every member of a persecuting society agrees with such an ideology. The refugee camp and the Underground Railroad demonstrates that not everybody believes in hate and persecution. The Native Americans in this refugee camp escaped a deadly war, and the slaves of the Underground Railroad escaped the terrible racism of slavery. This was in part thanks to the bravery of those who went against the societal norms to save those who needed help.
Not everything in history is black and white. Sometimes it's important to take a closer look, and you might even find something new. Today, we looked at a new archaeological discovery in Scituate, Massachusetts, about Native Americans and colonial people who decided to protect them. This refugee camp saved over 300 refugees. It may have been a small drop in the bucket of the blood that was spilled during King Philip's War, but it was useful. I'm glad that our archaeological team discovered this box that was left for us by the colonial people who made this refugee camp. This has been Unbridging History. This is Johann Welsh, signing off.
This is Thaddeus Rutherford, signing off.
This is Oliver Lux, signing off.